crippled woman. Get out of my son's house.
Mother, stop. What are you doing?
She is useless. I want her gone.
That's my wife. Leave her alone.
Please help me.
When Michael unexpectedly returned home, he froze at the doorway. His mother's cruel voice echoed through the house, threatening the wife he had sworn to protect. But before he could confront her, one shocking confession changed everything, revealing a buried secret that would tear the family apart forever that night. Michael was never supposed to come home before midnight. But when his meeting was cancelled, he decided to surprise his wife, Sarah, with dessert. He imagined her smile, the dinner they might share, and for once, a peaceful evening away from the tension that had filled their home. Instead, the moment he opened the front door, he heard his mother's voice. Cold, sharp, unrecognizable. "You will keep your mouth shut," she hissed, "because if Michael ever learns the truth, you'll lose far more than the use of your legs." Michael froze. From the hallway, he could see Sarah sitting in her wheelchair, trembling, her hands clenched around the armrests. His mother stood over her, holding an envelope Michael had never seen before. He wanted to storm into the room. But then Sarah said something that stopped him. "You promised no one would ever know what happened that night." Michael's breath caught. "What night?" His mother lowered her voice, "And I kept that promise until you started asking questions." A photograph slipped from the envelope and landed face up on the floor. Michael could only see part of it from where he stood, a wrecked car, a hospital bracelet, and the corner of a man's face that looked disturbingly familiar. Then his mother whispered the words that shattered everything he believed about his marriage. "Your accident was never an accident." Sarah began to cry. A floorboard creaked beneath Michael's shoe. Both women turned toward the hallway. Silence swallowed the house. Michael stepped forward, but before he could demand answers, Sarah looked at him with terror and said, "Michael, there's something you need to know about your mother." What happened the night Sarah lost the use of her legs? Why had Michael's mother been hiding the truth? And whose face was in that photograph? If you believe that no spouse should ever be intimidated into silence, that love means protecting the person who trusts you most, and that family loyalty should never become an excuse for cruelty, kindly subscribe and turn on the notification bell now. Stories like this remind us that the people who appear weakest may be carrying the strongest truths, and sometimes one hidden secret can change an entire family forever. Michael stared at Sarah. For several seconds, nobody moved. The small white bakery box in his hand slipped from his fingers and struck the hardwood floor. Chocolate frosting splattered across the lid. His mother, Margaret, recovered first. "Michael," she said, suddenly softening her voice, "you weren't supposed to be home." He looked at her. Those 6 words sounded almost like a confession. Sarah wiped her cheeks hurriedly. "Michael, please." "No." His voice was barely above a whisper. He stepped into the living room. "Don't tell me to please do anything. Somebody is going to explain what I just heard." Margaret straightened. At 63, she still carried herself with the rigid elegance that had intimidated waiters, receptionists, neighbors, and nearly every girlfriend Michael had ever brought home. Her silver-streaked dark hair was pinned perfectly behind her head. Her blouse remained smooth despite the summer heat. Only her hand betrayed her. It was shaking. Michael noticed. He looked toward the photograph on the floor. Margaret moved toward it. Michael reached it first. "Don't." He picked it up. The image had been taken at night. Rain streaked through the flash. A black sedan rested against a guardrail, its front end crushed almost beyond recognition. Emergency lights glowed in the distance. Michael remembered that car. His stomach tightened. It was Sarah's. The car she had been driving 3 years earlier when she went over the embankment on Route 17. The accident that had fractured 2 vertebrae. The accident that had damaged her spinal cord. The accident doctors said had probably taken away her ability to walk for the rest of her life. But that wasn't what made Michael's fingers go cold. In the photograph, standing beside the wreckage, was his father. Robert. Michael stared. His father had died almost 2 years ago. And according to everything Michael had ever been told, Robert had been in Chicago on the night of Sarah's accident. Michael slowly lifted his eyes. "Why is Dad here?" Margaret said nothing. "Mom." Sarah closed her eyes. Michael turned toward her. "You knew." Sarah's silence hurt more than an answer. He stumbled backward. "You knew." "Michael." "How long?" She looked at him. "Since the accident." The room seemed to tilt. Michael laughed once, but there was no humor in it. 3 years. Sarah lowered her head. "You've known for 3 years." "I was afraid." "Of what?" Her eyes moved toward Margaret. Michael followed them. Margaret stiffened. "Don't look at me like that." "How should I look at you?" "You don't understand what happened." "Then explain it." Margaret's lips tightened. Sarah whispered, "Michael, your father was following me that night." Michael felt every muscle in his body lock. "Following you?" "Yes." "Why?" Sarah looked toward the photograph. "Because I knew something about him." Margaret snapped, "Enough." Michael turned on her. "No, you don't get to say enough anymore." For the first time in his life, Margaret looked startled by her son. Michael had spent 40 years accommodating that woman. When he was 8, she had decided he was too old to cry at his grandfather's funeral. When he was 14, she had thrown away the guitar his father bought him because she believed music would distract him from school. When he was 23, she had told his first serious girlfriend that Michael needed someone from a family with standards. The girlfriend disappeared 2 weeks later. Michael never knew exactly what Margaret had said. He had simply accepted that his mother was difficult because his father always had. "Your mother loves intensely," Robert used to say. Only now did Michael wonder whether love had been the correct word. Sarah wheeled backward. "Michael, there's more." Margaret moved toward her. "You don't know what you're doing." Sarah looked up. For years, Michael had watched his wife adjust to a life she never expected. He remembered the first weeks after the hospital. The metal rails beside their bed. The ramps installed outside the house. The physical therapy appointments. The first morning Sarah tried to transfer herself from the bed to her wheelchair without asking him for help. She fell. Michael found her on the floor, furious and humiliated. He rushed toward her. "Don't touch me." He stopped immediately. Sarah had covered her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered moments later. "I just want to do one thing by myself." Michael sat on the floor beside her. "Then we'll sit here until you're ready." That had been their marriage. Not perfect, but patient. At least he had believed it was honest. Now he wondered how many nights Sarah had lain beside him carrying a truth she was too frightened to speak. "Tell me everything," he said. Margaret folded her arms. "Michael, you're upset." He turned toward her. "You threatened my wife." "I was protecting this family." "From what?" "From destruction." Sarah laughed bitterly. "You mean from consequences?" Margaret's face changed. It happened for barely a second. But Michael saw it. Fear. Real fear. Sarah rolled toward the small writing desk by the window. She opened the bottom drawer. Margaret rushed forward. "Sarah." Michael stepped between them. His mother stopped. Sarah removed a brown folder. Michael recognized it immediately. For months he had seen Sarah closing that drawer whenever he entered the room. He had once teased her about hiding birthday plans. She had smiled and said something like that. Now he understood that smile had contained fear. Sarah placed the folder on her lap. "Your father came to see me 6 days before the accident." Michael stared at her. "Here." "No, at the library." Before the crash, Sarah had worked as an assistant director at the county library. She loved old records, local newspapers, genealogies, historical archives. Michael used to joke that Sarah could discover a family scandal by searching a phone book. Neither of them had realized how prophetic that joke would become. Sarah opened the folder. "Your father asked me for help finding property records connected to Ashford Development." Michael knew the name. His father had spent 35 years building Ashford Construction from a two-man contracting operation into one of the largest private developers in the county. After Robert died, Michael inherited the company. He had never questioned why certain old projects had vanished from the corporate files. His father had called it routine archiving. Sarah continued. "At first, I thought he was doing estate planning, but he kept asking me to find older records, deeds, tax transfers, shell companies. Eventually, I realized he wasn't researching property." "What was he researching?" "Your mother." Margaret looked toward the window. Michael felt something heavy settle inside his chest. "What did he find?" Sarah removed several photocopies. He discovered that someone had been moving money out of the company for years. Michael shook his head. "No, nearly $2 million. He stared at Margaret. His mother didn't deny it. Michael's voice became quiet. "Mom." Margaret looked at him. "That business belonged to our family." "That isn't an answer. Your father controlled everything. So you stole from him." "I took what I was entitled to." Michael stared at her. Sarah continued gently. "There was more." Of course there was. Michael could feel it now. The secret had layers. Every answer opened another door. Sarah handed him a photocopy of a bank transfer. One name appeared repeatedly. Crestview Holdings. Dad knew. Sarah nodded. "He discovered it shortly before he came to me." "Why you?" "Because he didn't trust anyone at the company." Michael swallowed. That hurt. He had worked beside his father for 16 years. "Not even me." Sarah reached toward him. "He was trying to protect you." Michael stepped away. He suddenly remembered an argument with Robert 5 days before Sarah's crash. They had been standing inside his father's office. Robert had asked whether Michael would ever consider selling his shares. Michael laughed. "Why would I?" His father looked strangely tired. "Sometimes walking away is worth more than ownership." Michael had dismissed it. He remembered Robert standing by the window after Michael left, shoulders slumped, staring into darkness. At the time, Michael thought his father was worried about retirement. Now those words returned with terrible weight. Sarah spoke. "Your father believed your mother was planning to leave him." Margaret scoffed. "He believed many things. But he found the account." Margaret said nothing. "And the letters." Michael looked up. "What letters?" Sarah hesitated. Margaret whispered, "Don't." Sarah pulled 3 envelopes from the folder. All were addressed to Margaret. The handwriting belonged to another man. Michael knew it. He had seen it on Christmas cards throughout childhood. Uncle David. Margaret's eyes filled with anger. David was Michael's uncle by blood. He had been Robert's closest friend. They started Ashford Construction together. David died 15 years ago after suffering what everyone believed was a heart attack while driving. Michael remembered the funeral. His mother had cried harder than David's own brother. At 15, Michael thought that meant she was compassionate. At 40, he understood differently. Sarah said, "Your mother and David had an affair." The sentence landed like broken glass. Michael looked at Margaret. "Is that true?" Margaret's jaw trembled. "It was complicated." "Is it true?" "Yes." Michael turned away. Images from childhood came back strangely reordered. David helping Margaret carry groceries when Robert worked late. David taking Michael fishing. David attending school, events his father missed. One memory rose above the rest. Michael was 7. He had awakened during a thunderstorm and gone downstairs looking for his mother. He saw Margaret standing in the kitchen with David. They had jumped apart when he entered. Margaret told him David had stopped by because his car wouldn't start. Michael believed her. Children usually believed the explanations adults handed them. Years later, memory kept the truth long after innocence buried it. Michael looked at Sarah. "What does this have to do with your accident?" Sarah took a breath. "Your father believed David wasn't the only secret." Margaret snapped, "Stop." Michael's eyes moved between them. "What secret?" Sarah looked terrified now. "Not of Margaret. Of him." "Michael." "What secret?" She reached into the folder. Her fingers closed around one final envelope. Margaret lunged. Michael caught his mother's wrist. She struggled. "Give me that." "Mom, you have no idea what this will do." Michael released her. For the first time, Margaret's polished exterior collapsed. "Some truths don't save people," she said. "They destroy them." Michael stared. "Maybe you should have thought about that before threatening Sarah." Margaret's expression hardened again. Sarah held out the envelope. Inside was an old laboratory report. Michael read the first line. Then the second. He didn't understand. Not immediately. Then he saw his name. Michael Robert Ashford. A second name. David William Carter. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. Michael stopped breathing. The room disappeared. His father wasn't his father. Robert Ashford, the man who taught him to ride a bicycle. Robert, who drove 6 hours through a snowstorm when Michael broke his arm during college. Robert, who sat beside him on the morning of his wedding and said, "Marriage is not finding someone perfect. It's choosing who you will keep showing up for." Robert had not been his biological father. David was. Michael lowered the paper. Margaret was crying. "You don't understand." He stared at her. "How long did Dad know?" "Michael." "How long?" 22 years. He recoiled. 22 years. Robert had known before Michael graduated college. Before he joined the company. Before his wedding. Before thousands of Sunday dinners and birthdays and Christmas mornings. And Robert had never treated Michael differently. Michael sank into a chair. "Why didn't he tell me?" Margaret wiped her face. "Because he loved you." That answer hurt most. Sarah whispered, "That's why he came to me." Michael looked up. He was planning to expose everything. "No." Sarah shook her head. He was planning to forgive her. Margaret closed her eyes. Michael frowned. What? Your father told me he didn't care about embarrassing your mother. He didn't even care about recovering all the money. He wanted to put the company into a trust for you, confront her privately, and end the marriage. Margaret turned toward the window. Sarah continued. But there was one thing he wouldn't forgive. What? The money wasn't just going to your mother. Michael looked at the bank records again. Sarah pointed to Crestview Holdings. That company belonged to a man named Richard Harlan. Michael knew the name. Everyone in the county did. Harlan had developed half the commercial properties on the north side. He had also been his father's biggest competitor. What does Harlan have to do with this? Margaret whispered, nothing. Sarah ignored her. Your mother had been feeding him confidential bids for almost 8 years. Michael stared. His stomach turned. Ashford Construction had lost 3 major government contracts during that period. His father blamed market changes. The company laid off 40 employees after one loss. Michael remembered standing beside workers carrying boxes to their cars. People with children, mortgages, medical bills, and all those years Margaret had talked about loyalty, family, sacrifice. Michael rose slowly. You sold company information. Margaret lifted her chin. Your father would have lost everything eventually. You don't know that. He was old-fashioned. Harlan understood where the market was going. You cost people their jobs. I protected myself. Michael almost laughed. There it was. The truth beneath every justification. Not family. Not survival. Herself. Sarah continued. Robert found evidence Harlan was planning to buy Ashford after forcing it into bankruptcy. Your mother would receive a percentage. Michael looked down at the photograph again. And Sarah found out. Sarah nodded. Your father asked me to copy the records somewhere safe. He said if anything happened to him, I should give them to you. A chill moved through Michael. If anything happened to him. He was afraid. Of Mom. Sarah's eyes flicked toward Margaret. Of Harlan. Margaret shook her head. This is absurd. No, Sarah said, it is. She reached under the stack of documents and pulled out an old voice recorder. Michael recognized it. His father used to carry it at construction sites. Where did you get that? Your father gave it to me. Margaret's face drained. Sarah pressed play. Static filled the room. Then Robert's voice. Older, tired, but unmistakable. If you're hearing this, Sarah, then I was right to be worried. Michael gripped the chair. Robert continued. Richard knows I found the accounts. Margaret says she can control him, but she can't. She never could. Margaret stepped forward. Turn it off. Sarah didn't. I've made mistakes, Robert's recording continued. The biggest was believing silence keeps a family together. It doesn't. Silence only gives lies room to grow. Michael closed his eyes. He could almost see him. His father at his desk. Tie loosened. Reading glasses low on his nose. Robert continued. If Michael ever hears this, tell him something for me. Biology is an accident. Being his father was a choice I would make every day again. Michael covered his mouth. The recording clicked. Silence. Sarah was crying. Michael looked toward Margaret. She seemed smaller now. But one question remained. The worst one. The accident, Michael whispered. Sarah's expression changed. Your father arranged to meet me that night. Where? At the old Henderson warehouse. Michael knew it. An abandoned property near Route 17. He was going to give me the original documents. I was supposed to take them home and call you. But you never got there. No. Sarah's hands tightened. I noticed a car following me. Michael felt sick. What car? A dark SUV. Who was driving? I couldn't see at first. Margaret interrupted. She was driving too fast in the rain. Sarah looked at her. You weren't there. Margaret froze. Michael turned. What? Sarah stared at Margaret. You just said I was driving too fast. Margaret opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Sarah's voice trembled. The police report never mentioned my speed. Michael looked at his mother. How did you know? I assumed. No. Michael moved closer. How did you know? Margaret backed away. Michael suddenly remembered the first night at the hospital. Sarah was undergoing surgery. He had sat in a plastic chair outside the operating room, covered in rainwater. Margaret arrived before the police finished questioning him. At the time, Michael was grateful. He had collapsed into her arms. She whispered, sometimes terrible accidents just happen. Michael remembered something else now. He had never told her police believed Sarah lost control on the curve. He had never even told her exactly where the accident occurred. Yet Margaret seemed to know. A heavier memory followed. The following morning, Michael found his mother standing beside Sarah's unconscious hospital bed. Margaret held Sarah's hand. Michael thought she was praying. Now he wondered what she had actually been saying. Sarah's voice broke through the memory. I remembered more after rehabilitation. Michael turned. Maury. The doctors said trauma could affect memory. For months, all I remembered were headlights. She looked directly at Margaret. Then I started having dreams. Margaret's face went pale. In one dream, I heard a horn. In another, someone shouted my name. Then about a year ago, I remembered the SUV pulling beside me. Michael barely breathed. And Sarah swallowed. I saw your mother. Margaret shook her head. No. You were in the passenger seat. Michael's eyes widened. Passenger. Sarah nodded. Michael whispered, who was driving? Nobody answered. Then Michael understood. Harlan. Sarah nodded. Margaret moved toward the doorway. Michael blocked her path. Where are you going? I'm leaving. No. You cannot keep me here. I'm not keeping you anywhere, but you're going to answer me. Margaret's breathing became shallow. Michael had never seen her afraid of him. Did Harlan run Sarah off the road? No. Did he? No. Then what happened? He was only supposed to stop her. Sarah flinched. The words hung in the air. Margaret realized what she had said. Michael stared. Stop her. Margaret covered her mouth. Sarah whispered, you were there. Margaret began shaking. We wanted the documents. Michael felt rage rising, but beneath it was something colder. How? Harlan knew Robert had given you something, Margaret said to Sarah. He assumed you had copies. So you followed her? Yes. What happened? Margaret sank onto the sofa. For the first time, she looked 63. Maybe older. Richard pulled alongside her. I called her phone. She wouldn't answer. He wanted her to pull over. Sarah's breathing quickened. Michael knelt beside her. You don't have to listen. Yes, Sarah whispered, I do. Margaret looked at her. You panicked. Sarah's eyes flashed. You chased me through a storm. I told him to slow down. But you didn't tell him to stop. Margaret had no answer. Sarah's voice became quieter. He hit me. Michael turned sharply. Margaret whispered once. Sarah closed her eyes. The memory seemed to return through her body before it reached her words. I felt the impact behind the rear wheel. Michael took her hand. Sarah continued. My car spun. I remember the guardrail coming toward me, then another impact. Tears slipped down her cheeks. And nothing. Michael stood. You left her there. No. Margaret's voice broke. We stopped. Did you call 911? No. Michael stared. You left my wife dying in a ditch. I thought she was dead. That makes it worse. Margaret began crying. Harlan dragged me back into the SUV. He said if we were seen, everything was over. Michael turned away because he was afraid of what he might do if he kept looking at her. For years, he had blamed the rain. The road. Bad luck. Sarah had blamed herself. That was the cruelty Michael could barely process. Sarah had spent 3 years wondering whether one wrong turn of the steering wheel destroyed her life. And Margaret had watched. At Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays, she had watched Sarah struggle with ramps. She had watched Michael renovate the house. She had watched nurses teach Sarah how to transfer safely. And she had never spoken. You came to the hospital, Michael said. Margaret cried harder. I was terrified. You hugged me. I am your mother. You stood beside Sarah's bed. I was sorry. You told me accidents happen. I was trying to keep you together. Michael spun around. No, you were trying to keep yourself safe. Silence. Sarah squeezed Michael's hand. There's more. He almost laughed from disbelief. How can there possibly be more? Sarah looked at Margaret. Tell him what happened to Robert. Michael went still. Margaret's tears stopped. What does she mean? Margaret stared at Sarah. You have no proof. Sarah reached again for the recorder. Actually, I do. Margaret lunged. This time, Michael caught her shoulders. Stop. Give me that. Sarah wheeled backward. Margaret struggled desperately. You don't understand. Michael held her away. Sarah pressed another button. A man's voice filled the room. Not Robert's. Richard Harlan. You should have destroyed the recorder. Margaret stopped fighting. Her entire body seemed to collapse. Michael looked toward Sarah. How? Your father's recorder activates automatically when it hears voices. The recording continued. Margaret's voice followed. Robert thinks she has copies. Harlan answered. Then deal with her. I already tried. You panicked. She almost died. She should have. Michael felt his stomach turn. Then Margaret's recorded voice said something worse. I'm not doing that again. Harlan laughed. You didn't do anything, I was driving. The recording crackled. What about Robert? Margaret asked. A pause. Then Harlan replied. He's becoming a problem. Michael stared at his mother. His father had died 8 months after Sarah's crash. Heart attack. At least that was what everyone had been told. Michael remembered finding Robert in his study. A glass of bourbon on the desk. One hand hanging beside the chair. The medical examiner said cardiac arrest. Robert had suffered hypertension for years. Nobody questioned it. Except perhaps Sarah. Michael looked at her. You think Dad was murdered? Sarah whispered, I didn't know until 2 months ago. How? I found the recorder inside the lining of the folder. Michael frowned. You've had it 3 years. I never knew there was a second file. The memory card was hidden. Margaret sat motionless. Michael stared at her. Did Harlan kill Dad? I don't know. Did he? I said I don't know. Were you there? No. Did you know he was going to do something? Margaret looked away. That was enough. Michael's voice dropped. What did he say? Margaret trembled. He said Robert needed to be frightened. How? He wouldn't tell me. And after Dad died, I asked him. What did he say? Margaret whispered, he said problems sometimes solve themselves. Michael stared at the woman who had raised him. He wanted to find something familiar in her face. The woman who packed his school lunches. The woman who stayed beside his bed when he had pneumonia. The woman who applauded loudest at his graduation. But suddenly, those memories did not disappear. They became more complicated. That was almost worse. People wanted monsters to be monstrous all the time. It made judgment easy. But Margaret had loved Michael. And lied to him. Protected him. And betrayed his father. Held him when he cried. And abandoned Sarah in a wrecked car. Human beings were capable of holding tenderness in one hand and cruelty in the other. The existence of one did not erase the damage of the other. Sarah spoke quietly. I called Detective Morales yesterday. Margaret looked sharply at her. Michael turned. The detective from the accident. Sarah nodded. He retired last year. I showed him the recording privately. He told me to contact the district attorney. Margaret stood. You idiot. Michael stepped between them again. Do not speak to her like that. You have no idea what Harlan will do. Sarah stared at Margaret. I know exactly what he'll do. That's why I stopped being afraid. A phone rang. Everyone froze. It was Margaret's. She looked at the screen. Her face went white. Michael saw the name. Richard. Nobody moved. The phone rang again. Sarah whispered, answer it. Margaret shook her head. Michael picked up the phone. Michael, don't. He answered. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a man said, Margaret. Michael remembered Richard Harlan's voice from charity dinners. Deep. Measured. Always confident. Michael said nothing. Margaret. Michael finally answered. No, it's Michael. Silence. Longer this time. Then Harlan laughed softly. Well. Michael felt Sarah's fingers tighten around his. Harlan continued. I suppose tonight became interesting. Michael's skin prickled. You knew I was here. I know many things. Margaret began shaking her head. Michael looked toward the dark windows. Suddenly, the house felt exposed. How long have you been watching us? Harlan ignored the question. Put your mother on. No. Michael. You killed my father. Another silence. Then Harlan chuckled. Your father had a weak heart. My father. The word came deliberately. Michael wanted Harlan to hear it. Robert was his father. DNA did not get to rewrite 39 years of love. Harlan seemed to understand. Give Margaret the phone. Michael disconnected. Margaret stared at him. What have you done? I hung up. You shouldn't have. Sarah suddenly looked toward the window. Michael. Headlights swept across the curtains. A vehicle pulled into the driveway. Margaret whispered, "Oh God." Michael moved toward the window. A black SUV stopped outside. For one strange second, past and present collided. Sarah began breathing rapidly. The color vanished from her face. Same kind, she whispered. Michael turned. What? The SUV. A car door slammed outside. Margaret hurried toward Michael. Listen to me, Richard is dangerous. You're telling me now. I never wanted any of this. Sarah stared at her. You got into his vehicle. Margaret looked at Sarah. Something like shame crossed her face. I know. A knock struck the front door. 3 deliberate blows. Michael reached for his phone. Margaret grabbed his wrist. No police. He stared. You're still protecting him. No, I'm trying to protect you. The knocking came again. Harlan's voice carried through the door. Margaret. Michael dialed 911. Margaret whispered, he'll know. Good. He gave the dispatcher his address. Harlan stopped knocking. Silence followed. Then Michael heard footsteps moving away. He looked through the window. Harlan was returning to the SUV. Michael almost felt relief. Until Sarah said, "Where's the folder?" They looked toward the desk. Gone. Michael spun around. Margaret was standing beside the hallway. Her hands were empty. Mom. Margaret looked confused. Then they heard glass break in the kitchen. Michael ran. A man in a dark jacket was climbing through the shattered back door. Not Harlan. Someone else. The man grabbed the folder from the kitchen counter where Margaret had apparently moved it during the confrontation. Michael rushed him. The intruder swung. Michael ducked and slammed into him. They crashed against the cabinets. Papers flew everywhere. The man drove an elbow into Michael's ribs. Michael lost his breath. Then something metallic struck the floor. A gun! Sarah screamed. The intruder reached for it. Michael kicked it beneath the table. The man punched him across the jaw. Michael staggered. Before the attacker could move again, Margaret appeared behind him holding a cast-iron skillet. She swung. The skillet struck his shoulder. He collapsed with a shout. Margaret stood over him trembling. Get away from my son. For one bewildering moment, Michael saw the mother he remembered. Fierce. Protective. Then sirens sounded outside. The intruder scrambled to his feet and bolted through the broken door. Police intercepted him in the yard. Minutes later, flashing red and blue light filled the house. Officers separated everyone. Detectives arrived. Statements were taken. The folder was collected. So was the recorder. So was Margaret's phone. At 11:47 p.m., Richard Harlan was arrested 2 miles away after officers found him attempting to leave town. The intruder in Michael's kitchen eventually admitted Harlan paid him to retrieve the evidence. And Margaret. She sat alone on the sofa as Detective Morales, called out of retirement as a witness and consultant, walked through the front door. The moment he saw her, his expression hardened. I always wondered, he said. Margaret looked up. About what? Morales glanced at Sarah. Why a woman with no alcohol in her system, good tires, and 20 years without a traffic citation, suddenly lost control on a road she drove every week. Margaret lowered her eyes. Sarah began to cry quietly. Morales walked toward her. "You should have been believed sooner." Sarah shook her head. "I didn't remember. Sometimes the truth takes its time." Michael looked at his wife. 3 years. 3 years, the truth had waited inside fragments of memory. Headlights. Rain. A horn. Margaret's face. Michael knelt beside Sarah. "I'm sorry." She looked confused. "For what?" "For not knowing. You couldn't know. I should have noticed you were afraid of her." Sarah wiped her eyes. "I worked very hard to make sure you didn't." "Why?" Her answer came slowly. "Because after the accident, I woke up and everything was different." She looked down at her legs. "I couldn't walk, I couldn't work, I couldn't even get into our bathroom without help, and every person who entered that hospital room looked at me with pity." Michael squeezed her hand. "But your mother didn't." He frowned. "She looked at me with fear." Sarah's voice softened. "The first time I woke up and saw her, she leaned close to me." Michael remembered that morning. His mother whispering beside the bed. "What did she say?" Sarah looked at Margaret. "She said, 'You survived, be grateful, don't force everyone else to lose something too.'" Michael's eyes filled. Margaret whispered, "I was terrified." Sarah nodded. "So was I." That was the difference. Margaret had used fear to control. Sarah had eventually used fear as a reason to search for truth. Police led Margaret outside shortly after midnight. Before reaching the door, she stopped. "Michael." He didn't answer. She looked at him. "I did love you." Michael's eyes burned. "I know." That surprised her. He continued. "That's what makes this so hard." Margaret began crying. "I was afraid of losing everything. And you nearly took everything from everyone else." She looked at Sarah. "I'm sorry." Sarah didn't answer. Some apologies arrived too late to become bridges. They could only become acknowledgements. Margaret walked outside. The door closed behind her. Michael remained beside Sarah. For several minutes, the house was silent except for police radios outside. Then Sarah whispered, "There's one more thing." Michael almost laughed. "Please tell me it's not another murder." Despite everything, she smiled faintly. "No." She reached inside the folder police had briefly returned for inventory clarification and removed a sealed envelope. Robert's handwriting was on the front. "For Michael." His hands shook. He opened it. Inside was a single letter. He read quietly, "Michael, if you ever receive this." "Then I waited too long to tell you something I should have told you myself. You are my son. I want that sentence to be the first thing you remember. Not because we share blood, we don't. I learned that years ago. I was angry for a long time. Then one afternoon, I watched you helping a boy fix his bicycle outside our office. You were 24, you missed a meeting because you refused to leave him stranded. And I realized something. I had spent years asking whether you were mine when the better question was whether I had been yours. A father is not a laboratory result. A father is the man who stays. I hope I stayed enough. Whatever happens between your mother and me, do not let our failures teach you to become suspicious of love. Choose honesty, especially when honesty costs you something. And if Sarah is beside you when you read this, listen to her. She has more courage than either of us deserves. Dad. Michael stopped. He could no longer see the page clearly. Sarah touched his arm. Michael laughed through his tears. He still signed it, Dad. Sarah smiled. Because he was. Michael folded the letter against his chest. Outside, dawn began slowly dissolving the darkness. 3 months later, the district attorney announced indictments. Richard Harlan was charged in connection with Sarah's crash, corporate fraud, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and Robert's death after investigators discovered evidence that Harlan had secretly replaced one of Robert's heart medications with a drug capable of creating a dangerous interaction. Margaret cooperated. Her testimony helped prosecutors reconstruct years of financial crimes. It did not erase her responsibility. She eventually pleaded guilty to conspiracy, financial fraud, obstruction, and charges connected with leaving the scene after Sarah's crash. The hardest day was not sentencing. It was the day Michael visited her in jail. They sat across from each other, separated by glass. Margaret looked older. No perfect blouse. No carefully pinned hair. No authority left to hide behind. "I keep thinking about your childhood," she said through the telephone. "So do I. Do you hate me?" Michael considered the question. "No." She looked surprised. "I don't know what I feel yet." Margaret nodded. "Maybe hatred would be easier. For both of us." She began crying. Michael looked down. "I spent my entire life believing protecting family meant keeping it together," she said, "no matter what." Michael looked at her. "You didn't keep it together." "I know. You kept it quiet." Margaret closed her eyes. And there it was. The lesson Robert had learned too late. Silence was not peace. A family could sit around the same table, smile in photographs, exchange Christmas presents, and still be rotting beneath secrets no one dared expose. Michael lifted the phone again. Dad said something on his recorder. Margaret looked up. He said silence gives lies room to grow. She nodded slowly. He was right. Yes. Michael stood. Margaret pressed her hand against the glass. He hesitated, then placed his palm against the other side. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Perhaps not ever in the form Margaret wanted. But acknowledgement. She was his mother. She had done terrible things. Both truths could exist. Michael left. Sarah was waiting outside. Sunlight poured across the courthouse steps. "You okay?" she asked. Michael nodded. Eventually. He walked behind her wheelchair as they reached the ramp. Sarah stopped. "Don't." Michael froze. Then she smiled. "I can push myself." Michael laughed. "Sorry." She rolled forward. Halfway down the ramp, she looked back. "You coming?" "Always." A year passed. Ashford Construction survived. Michael sold several properties tied to the fraudulent transactions and established a fund for workers who had lost pensions and jobs because of the schemes. He renamed the company. Not after himself. Not after Robert. Names Michael had learned could become monuments to pride. Instead, he created an employee-owned partnership. Sarah returned to the library part-time. The first morning she went back, she sat outside for nearly 5 minutes. Michael noticed. "Nervous. Terrified. Want me to come in?" "No." He smiled. "Good answer." She rolled toward the entrance alone. Michael watched her disappear through the doors. He thought about the woman who had once sat on their bedroom floor after falling from her wheelchair and whispered that she wanted to do one thing by herself. Now she was doing hundreds. Not because she had become some inspirational symbol. Sarah hated when people reduced her life to that. She remained impatient, funny, stubborn, occasionally impossible. She still forgot where she left her phone, still burned pancakes, still beat Michael mercilessly at crossword puzzles. Her wheelchair was part of her life. It was not the definition of her life. One evening, nearly 18 months after the truth came out, Sarah found Michael sitting in Robert's old study. The photograph from the accident lay on the desk. She rolled beside him. "You still look at that?" "Sometimes." "Why?" Michael studied the image. For years, he thought photographs preserved truth. Now he knew they preserved moments. Truth required context. The photograph showed Robert near Sarah's wrecked car. It did not show that he had arrived minutes after the crash because he had been waiting at the warehouse and became worried. It did not show him crawling down the embankment. It did not show him finding Sarah unconscious. It did not show him calling the ambulance anonymously because he feared Harlan was watching. It did not show the secret Robert carried afterward, the knowledge that his own silence had helped create the disaster. Michael turned the photograph over. "Because I used to think this picture proved Dad had something to do with your accident." Sarah nodded. "And now it reminds me how dangerous half a truth can be." She took his hand. On the back of the photograph, Robert had written 5 words. "I should have spoken sooner." Michael kept those words. Not as punishment, as warning. Years later, when people asked how his marriage survived everything, Michael never gave romantic answers. He didn't say love conquered all. It hadn't. Evidence mattered. Courage mattered. Therapy mattered. Boundaries mattered. Consequences mattered. And truth mattered even when it arrived ugly, inconvenient, and years late. Sarah eventually met Margaret again. It was her choice. Michael offered to come. Sarah refused. The meeting took place in a prison visitation room. Margaret sat opposite her. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, Margaret said, "Why did you come?" Sarah looked at the woman who had haunted her nightmares. "I wanted to see whether I was still afraid of you." Margaret swallowed. "And?" Sarah considered it. "No." Margaret lowered her eyes. "I suppose that's good." "It is. I wish I could change what happened." "You can't." "I know." Sarah leaned forward. "But you can stop telling yourself you did it because you loved your family." Margaret looked up. Sarah's voice remained calm. "You did it because you were afraid of consequences." Margaret cried. Sarah did not comfort her. Compassion did not require pretending accountability was cruelty. Before leaving, Sarah said, "I forgive myself." Margaret looked confused. "For what?" "For surviving." Sarah wheeled away. That sentence followed Margaret long after the door closed. And perhaps that was the deepest secret the family had hidden. Not the affair. Not the money. Not Michael's biological father. Not even the crime. It was the belief that keeping powerful people comfortable mattered more than protecting the person they had harmed. Sarah had carried that burden. Robert had carried it. Michael unknowingly had lived inside it. And Margaret had weaponized it. But secrets only survive while everyone agrees to protect them. The moment one person decides the truth is worth the consequences, the architecture of deception begins to collapse. 5 years after the night Michael came home early, he and Sarah sat on the back porch of a smaller house overlooking a lake. They had sold the old home. Too many ghosts. Sarah held 2 glasses of lemonade. Michael opened a small wooden box. Inside was Robert's letter. The edges had softened from years of handling. Sarah smiled. "You're reading it again." "Maybe. You know it by heart." "Probably." Michael looked across the water. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if my meeting hadn't been cancelled?" Sarah considered it. "Yes, and I think I would have told you." "When?" She laughed. "That part I haven't figured out." He smiled. Then her expression grew serious. "I was getting close. I know. I just needed to believe that losing your mother wouldn't mean losing you too." Michael looked at her. "You never had to choose." "I know that now." He took her hand. Somewhere across the lake, children were laughing. A dog barked. Wind moved through the trees. Ordinary sounds. Once Michael believed peace meant nothing terrible was happening. Now he knew better. Peace was being able to live without pretending terrible things had never happened. Sarah rested her head against his shoulder. "Do you regret coming home early?" Michael looked at her. Not for 1 second. Because that night had destroyed the family he thought he had. But it also revealed the family that was real. A father whose love survived a devastating truth. A wife whose courage survived intimidation. A marriage forced to choose honesty over comfort. And a man who finally learned that loyalty without truth was not loyalty at all. Sometimes the worst moment in a person's life is not the moment everything falls apart. Sometimes it is the moment everything false finally does. And what remains afterward, painful, unfinished, imperfect, may be the first thing solid enough to rebuild upon. Dear viewers, if you believe a vulnerable person should never be threatened into silence, that marriage should be a place of protection rather than fear, and that no family reputation is worth covering up cruelty or injustice, then let this story leave you with something important. Silence can protect a secret, but it can also protect the person causing the harm. If Sarah's courage to confront the truth touched you, kindly subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more powerful stories about love, betrayal, justice, courage, and the secrets that change lives. And tell us in the comments, could you ever forgive a mother who did what Margaret did? Was Michael right to stand beside Sarah even after discovering she had hidden the truth for years? And if revealing a terrible secret could destroy your family but save someone you love, would you speak up or remain silent?